Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for the RITI session, the Research and Innovation Training Institute session today. We are honored to have Stella Smith from the Minority Achievement, Creativity, and High Ability, or MACH-III Center. Stella Smith will speak today on a seat at the table, serving on review panels. This is an interactive session today, so I hope that you'll interact and ask your questions and participate and become as engaged as you want to be. Feel free to do that today. This is the time to do it. We want to make sure that we answer any questions that you have about serving on review panels, and this is a great opportunity for you to do so. Without further ado, I'd like to present Dr. Stella Smith. Stella?
Thank you so much, Karen, for that wonderful introduction and for the opportunity to come and speak and talk about a seat at the table serving on review panels. Excuse me. This just started as a conversation in the hallway, and now we're everyone. I think that it's wonderful because as I was serving on review panels, I'm just thinking how it's so critically important that we are on review panels and that we serve on review panels. And so this is a wonderful way to talk about that and to share that information with you, and you can go back and share this with your departments. So first, a thank you to Karen Cotton and Research and Innovation for the invitation to speak and for creating this training session in order for us to become better researchers, better innovators, better academics and scholars at Prairie View. So thank you for all of the work that you are doing to help us be better and do better in our roles. So thank you, Karen. I want to start with a kind of an icebreaker opening question. Karen said, I'm more of an interactive speaker, so I think of this as I'm facilitating a conversation that we're having together. So if you have comments that you want to share, I'm only using one screen today, so I can't see everybody all the time, so you can just start talking and it'll just come out of nowhere, but that'll be great. I really prefer to have that interactive energy. So if you got a question, throw it out there. If you have an impression or a thought, please share it as we think about serving on review panels. So my opening question is, have you, oops, there's spelling here. Have you reviewed grants for funders, i.e. for NSF or the Department of Education? And if you have, what one word would you use to describe that experience? So has anyone been a reviewer for grants?
And you only asked for one word, but I guess I would say informative. That's not really, it's two words that I'd really use. But
okay, give us the two. Give us the two, Dr. Blanc.
It was an eye-opener.
Yes, exactly. And expand on that a little bit for us.
You know, it was an eye-opener because my experience is that when you're sitting around the table, and at that particular time, I could have been the only person of color that was at that review panel. And it's just amazing at some of the comments that are being made, especially as it relates to, and this would have been a situation where these comments probably, and I won't say that they knew exactly what they were doing, but if you're reviewing a program and you know that it's an African-American program that you're looking at, it's just some of the comments, and it's just amazing as to how the mind works with these grants sometimes, especially if you're dealing with the majority institutions or persons from majority institutions, because they do not understand the culture, they do not understand the struggle, and they do not know the history. So if you don't know that, and it's an HBCU, I do think that there are some issues that we're faced with that we don't even know that they're saying about us around the table, and that's very important. And it sometimes makes me wonder, especially in that scientific realm, you know, it's sometimes like you could be fighting a losing battle because the cards are stacked against you, and you hate to think that way, but sometimes it comes off as that no matter what you do, you do have some cards that are stacked against you.
That is basically the synopsis of that whole conversation that we had in the hallway. That was perfect. In terms of why we have to be around the table to give voice to those applications when they don't see the value or the relevancy, or they don't understand the context in which those scholars are writing that work and the resources that might be at that home institution. Anyone else, having already served on review panels, have a word or 2 words about what that experience was like? No one else? Going once?
Hi, Dr. Smith.
Hi.
Hi, how are you? And hi, Dr. Block. I saw you from the writing workshop we did last week, so I recognize you. I just wanted to kind of share, because I'm from another ethnic group or minority group. I could really relate to what Dr. Block is saying, and pretty much just a little bit of background for me. I've been at the College of Nursing since 1997, so I've been with my home, the College of Nursing, for 20-something years. So, but I went to, after I finished my dissertation, I was lucky enough to get into the VA, because I felt like it's kind of like a return back service to our veterans, because they actually were my participants in my dissertation. So, but having said that, I was so lucky, and sometimes I feel like it's serendipity or God's plan, or both, that I had also been appointed to serve in the IRB panel as a nurse representative for our magnet designation. So from that standpoint, I'll just be honest, when I was appointed in 2012, and I've been serving at it since then up to the present time, I just felt like I was like an imposter, because even though I may have, this is just the personal feeling I had, even though I have my PhD, I have my experience, obviously, as an educator, and I pretty much know what my role anyway. As I said, that feeling, because I'm seated at the table of just brilliant, just awesome scientists, and sometimes I felt like, oh my gosh, what am I doing here? And then I had to have a reset button and said, I have something to contribute, and that's my nursing expertise, because I've been an educator with our future nurses for a long time, and I felt like from that perspective, and obviously from an HBCU affiliation that I have had, I felt like the empowering feeling that, okay, renounce the thought, because be humble, and feel that yes, you do have validate yourself. You have sit on the table from looking at protocols. It's nothing personal. They need or you can contribute your nursing expertise from the point of view of protecting protection human subjects. So but I just wanted to kind of share that as when I first started. Like as I said, I don't have that anymore, but I just really felt it was very humbling. So
yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that, because that's something that we're going to touch on as we talk about serving on these committees. Anyone else have an experience? Maybe one more before. Experience serving on a review panel for grants? Okay, we're going to move forward. If someone would like to share as we're talking, please do. Again, this is really an interactive panel, so it's us having a conversation. I almost think of it as if we were in person. It would be a round table around why we need to be at the table and serve on grant review panels. So I've switched the slide to talk about the objectives of the presentation, and there's really 4 of them. 1, talking about the need, why we need to be at the table. And 2, giving a little bit of an overview of the process to be selected for grants and what happens when you are selected as a grant reviewer for those that haven't had the opportunity to do so. Talking about some of the pros and cons of being selected. And I have started that list, but hopefully we can talk together about some other pros and cons, and we can add to that. And then tips for submitting grants based on the review experience that I actually just had. I was a reviewer for a grant a couple of weeks ago, which was an interesting experience where I felt all of the kind of imposter syndrome, but also the empowerment of knowing that my educational experience was important and that the diverse experiences that I had were needed around that table, that there were plenty of people that understood the technical part of this, but they needed people that came from the diverse perspective in order to round out the panel review. So why we need to be around the table, let me just do a bit smaller. So to bring diverse voices and experiences to the review panel process. So as our colleagues mentioned, you know, many of these panels, well, let me step back and let me make sure that we are all on the same page about what we're talking about in terms of being a reviewer on a panel. So what I'm discussing, what I'm talking about is reviewing for large scale grants. So like NSF grants, College of Education grants. I'm sure y'all will have, there's a whole bunch of alphabet soup of different kinds of grants that you might be able to be a reviewer for. So volunteering and serving as a reviewer for grant competitions in order to assist those organizations in funding winning proposals. And so why we need to be at the table again is to bring diverse voices and experiences to review panel process. So this last panel review that I did was for NSF, and it was specifically focused on minority serving institutions. And so there were people on that panel that were very technically savvy, but were not clear about how an HBCU was an MSI because they were thinking about it more from an HSI or an Anapesi lens where you had to have a certain percentage. And so they questioned whether certain organizations that are traditional HBCUs even qualified to be in the panel. So having diverse voices and a clear understanding of the context in which our institutions enter into these competitions is important, and being able to voice those experiences and voice that knowledge within that panel is definitely important. We talk about more technical panels, help more technical panels impact the context of HBCUs and NMSIs. So there were comments on the panel about the number of publications that have been, a number of recent publications. However, they might not understand that a faculty member at an HBCU might have 4 or 5 classes. You know, and writing this grant, this pilot grant is maybe their re-entry into research. There were questions about research productivity. So not only just the publications, but what kinds of other research had you done? And so having someone around the table that has that understands the context of an HBCU or an MSI and the different ways in which we engage students and the different types of teaching and service loads that we might have is helpful as you explain and talk through and evaluate proposals. Ensure that HBCUs are provided an equitable opportunity for review in the competition process. And so there was one proposal that in this recent competition that basically just kind of got pushed to the side only because, well, mostly because its main person did not have a PhD, which wasn't required in the solicitation, but they didn't have a PhD, and because they were at, they didn't seem to be connected to the academic core of the institution. Now, whether that person should have even got to the point of review is another question, but it was clear that there can be some feeling around different types of scholars that write for these grants, even if they can be very successful with grants. And so having the opportunity to be around the table and speak to and for those individuals is important. So at least it is an equitable opportunity. I'm not saying that that grant should have been funded, but what I am saying is that it was important for me to speak up for that person so that they could be funded or not funded based on their actual credentials and what they wrote, not because of these kind of blush reviews of what they presented. And then another thing that is very valuable is gaining knowledge for future grant applications. So the knowledge that I learned around how the review process is done is invaluable to me as I go back and work on grant teams and write. One thing that I saw that was really important that we need to do at HBCUs is make the case for diversity at HBCUs in the document. I think often we assume that people know that there's a case for diversity at HBCUs, but we don't know who's in that room or who's on that panel or what they're judging by. And even if they do know that that's the case, if the case is not made in the document, then that could be something that is detrimental to that application and the opportunity for it to be funded. Does anyone else have any other reasons why we need to be at the table based on your experiences?
Stella, this is Karen. I thought it was interesting that on the panel that you were recently on, there were questions about if an HBCU is a minority serving institution. I thought that stood out for me.
Exactly. And I was actually very shocked by it too. When she said it, I was like, what? You know, it's like, it was just obvious to me that that is the case. But in this particular application, because you're not supposed to, it's supposed to be confidential. So that's why I'm not telling you exactly which one or what it was and all that.
Of course.
And this one was about broadening participation and research at MSI. So I think she was so laser focused in on this term of MSI, minority serving institution, and the grant applications that were coming from HSIs really made a case in terms of percentages about, oh, we just became an HSI, we're an emerging HSI, we're an HSI research institution. And this is why, and gave all this demographic information. And that's why I say, as an HBCU, I think we assume that everyone knows that we have a diverse population and that we meet those criteria and that we are automatically an MSI, but we don't know who is reviewing. These individuals could not have been educated here in the States and are now coming over to the States and not have an understanding of HBCUs. They might be looking specifically around the criteria that's in the solicitation. So if the solicitation says you have to make a case for diversity, you need to ensure that you make a case for diversity in the document. Now, this is where us being at the table makes a difference, because if that institution didn't do that, then we as people who know that HBCUs are MSI, we can share with that panel why that particular comment is not relevant to this evaluation process. And there were many times where I had to make that statement or that comment about these kind of more tangential, nitpicky things that people have, that they want to take over a panel review with those items. However, that isn't what we are discussing within the review. For example, in the personnel area, I think it was the partnership sheet, the partnership form. One group talked only about like their credentials. this particular doctor is almost like a bunch of bios, which I've seen that document be written that way before. That was a pet peeve of one of our panel reviewers. And he went in and in and in around the fact that that was how that was written. There was nothing wrong with how that was written. It was just not the way that he would have wanted it to be written. But that didn't negate the fact, one, that it was there, so it should be received credit, and two, that it was written. And so as a panel reviewer, you are able to help to balance that and really ensure that the grant has an equitable chance, the application has an equitable chance based on the ideas that is actually contained in it, instead of these kind of tangential ideas that other panel reviewers might have. So I'm going to move to this next slide. Let's see how I'm going to do it on time here. Ooh, I need to move. So these next 3 slides are a little bit of an overview of what happens when you are a reviewer. So first, you have to volunteer to be a reviewer. So I received my invitations to be a reviewer through emails. This particular one was NSF. So I was on several of those listservs and received an email from there. You can actually go in and volunteer to be a reviewer by sending the program officer your information. And so there's a link on NSF's website that says if you want to be a reviewer, and I'll jump out to that after this presentation is over and maybe put it in the chat and send that out. So if you're interested after we finish, I'll show you where that is. Also for the Department of Education, you go into the I believe it's the G5 system, and you're able to sign up to be a reviewer. So you have to somehow volunteer to be a reviewer for these things. And so I just did a quick Google search, reviewer for NSF or reviewer for DOE, and it popped up. So if you have another organization that you choose to be a reviewer, I'm assuming that it would be that easy, or I'd be happy to work with you to find the way in which to review. They send everyone an invitation to come to an orientation session. And so you attend this orientation session. Don't miss the orientation session because you're not in yet. I think this is them like testing your resolve around doing actually being a reviewer. So you want to make sure that whatever orientation session you sign up for, you do attend. After that, you'll receive a notification that you are selected as a reviewer. They'll talk a little bit about the time commitment, and you'll get the grants that you are assigned to read. So this might happen in a couple of different emails, but basically that's the next step. You'll have to create an account in whatever online reviewer system they have. So for NSF, it's Fastlane, and for DOE, it is G5. So I'm not sure what it is for others. It's very easy to sign up. Those of you that have submitted grants are probably familiar with these systems if you've submitted for NSF or DOE. And then you've got to prepare for the meeting. So we're going to talk a little bit more in depth about how you do that. They generally give you about 2 weeks in between when you get your assignments for grants and when you have to attend your panel meetings or your meetings to discuss the grants. This 2 weeks can be very deceiving. So, really prepare in those 2 weeks to be ready for the actual panel meetings, and be very intentional about reviewing the grants that you are assigned. So preparing for the meeting. Any questions so far? No, okay, keep going. So preparing for the meeting, read the grant solicitation. This is very important because you are evaluating the grant based on the grant solicitation. So knowing the information in the grant solicitation is really important. Those individuals that are very much on the technical side will know every piece of this grant solicitation. And they will use every piece of this grant solicitation to try to mark a grant out. So it's very important that you understand the information in the grant solicitation in order to be able to know when a criteria that is being applied is actually in the grant solicitation, or if it's something that they are very acute and very attuned to, but not exactly something that's in the solicitation. You also should be familiar with all of the parts of the grants. So for those of you that have submitted grants, you know this. We send all of this information in. You've got all of these parts. These grant documents are hundreds of pages long. So you need to be familiar with all of the different supplementary pieces of information that are sent in with the documents and with the application that you're working on. And you particularly need to be aware if something was required. That has been a sticking point, particularly in this last competition that I was in. There were several of them that made it through review, but didn't have certain documents that were required within the solicitation. And although they scored high in our rankings, they were disqualified because they did not have all of the items that were supposed to be there. So knowing what items have to be there or what items are optional is really important. You should also ensure that you don't have any conflicts of interest with any of these documents. So making sure you don't have relatives that are on some of these documents, or you don't have any kind of conflict of interest. If you do have a conflict of interest, it's actually okay. They will move you to other grants. They will do some other things. So it's not going to disqualify you from serving on a panel. You just need to be forthcoming around the fact that you have these conflicts so that they can make other arrangements for those grant submissions. Then you need to read your assigned grants, making sure that you are thorough. So like I said, many of these grants are 100 pages, but really the narrative is about 15 pages. The way that I read them is I actually start with the budget first, read the budget, read the narrative. Then I read the grant, because when I understand what they're spending their money on, then I understand their grant better. Then I go and look at their partnership information, and I check to see how their team looks together. So how balanced is their team, their PIs and their co-PIs and their research folks. You will come up with whatever way works best for you, but that is how I go through my process of reading. Now, in all of the information that they send you, they will most likely send you a template for how they want you to review the grants. So as you're reading your grant, you're going to want to start putting notes and working through a template. Generally, it's in Word first before you put it in the online system, just to avoid some horrible disasters. Bring that back up is important to have it in Word. So as you're reading your document, you're also focusing on the template and what they are looking for. And then I also put some notes down, and these are really talking points for me. So if there's something that really pops out about this grant that I really want to defend in a panel discussion, then I put that down so that I can remember. This last panel discussion that I had, I was assigned 6, and I ended up doing 8 because someone dropped out. So the night in between my panels, it was 2 days. The night in between my panels, I read 2 more. So 6 was really manageable. 8 wasn't that bad. They try to keep the panels that small, between 8 and 12 grant submissions. Then you participate in your grant meetings. So they can be 1 day, they can be 2 days, they can be over a series of days. So this last one that I did for NSF was 2 full days, an 8 to 5 day. The one that I did for DOE was over several days, it was over 4 days, and it was a couple of hours each day where we met and talked about the grants. So you share your talking points. As I mentioned, each one of the meetings might be held differently. For the one for NSF, you were assigned a role, either a reader, a scribe, or a leader. So a leader was someone that led the discussion about the grant. The scribe was the person that wrote down the notes. And then a reviewer, it was a reviewer, was another person that read the grant but didn't have to specifically write down notes around it. For DOE, everybody wrote notes for everything. So it just depends on what their process is, and they will share that with you during the orientation period. And I also, sorry about that. I encourage you to disagree on the panel. That respectfully, respectfully disagree on the panel and know that you are bringing expertise to the table that isn't there. They put you in that particular panel for a reason. And so an example of this is there was one grant proposal that someone who was heavily technical read, and when they explained it, it was exactly the opposite of what I thought it was, because I was focusing on the education part of the grant and they were focusing on the research part of the grant. And so both of those perspectives are important. The technical part is important, but also my education part was important. And then we had to figure out what was most important related to the solicitation and what the grant objectives were and how it was written. So your thoughts around the grant are valid and important, even when people are talking in all this technical language, like what are these grants? A couple of those pages and those equations, I had no idea what it was. But what I did understand was that they were going to update the curriculum in certain classes, and this is how different faculty were going to be able to use the enhancements that were going to be placed on campus. And this is how they were going to affect both faculty, students, and increase research. So that was in a nutshell what the grant was trying to do, even though I wasn't specifically clear on these equations and this modeling that they had within this grant process. The one other thing that I didn't share, and I think I'll share it in this next slide. Does anyone have any questions?
This is Karen again.
Hi.
I just want to say that you hit on an important point, and that is when you talked about you may not have known the technical formulas and all of that, but you were able to understand what the intent was of the proposal. And that brings up a point that the team in the Office of Research Advancement often says, and that is that the person serving on the review panel may not necessarily be a subject matter expert in your area of expertise. And so when you write something, it needs to be written in a way that is clear enough so that everyone who is reading, no matter what their area of expertise is, they are able to follow along and get at the heart of what it is that you're wanting to accomplish with that proposal. So that I thank you for bringing out that point.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And even though all of that jargon looked really pretty, you're absolutely right. The technical jargon can be something that is not accessible. And also just the writing, we all have our ways in which we write within our disciplines. And so thinking about the fact that, as you said, there are going to be some people that might not be those subject matter experts. So making sure that it's accessible to them. So I want to move into what are the pros and cons for serving. So I feel like the ability to learn about the grant review process was just so critical. So now I can bring that information to the grants that I submit and work on with Dr. Bonner in the MACH-III Center, and understand places where we might be clearer and where we might be more concise and really show our intent better, having gone through this process. Also, I feel like it's a wonderful opportunity to provide a diverse perspective on the grant proposals. You know, everybody can't be a grant reviewer. So many times they do want those individuals with advanced degrees, those that have been in the faculty ranks, to be reviewers. So what an awesome privilege it is to be able to be the person who gets to read these proposals and also be able to share and provide perspective that other faculty might not have, and not purposefully, not malicefully, but just might not have. And so I find it to be a great responsibility and opportunity to be able to be at the table. There is a monetary benefit. So for the Department of Education, well, pre-COVID, I hear they used to fly you to DC I have not reviewed any proposals pre-COVID, so this is a COVID phenomenon for me. So they do provide a small honorarium for reviewing proposals. So DOE, it's per day, and then for, I'm sorry, NSF, it's per day. DOE, it's per proposal, and I don't know if that will change or not, but there was an honorarium that was provided. You develop a relationship with the grant funder. So the person who was over our panel was a program officer. And so I was developing a relationship with this program officer so that the next time that I submit, I will already have a relationship with her and NSF, which is a wonderful way to gain relationships and to just, I mean, relationships really run this thing. So having relationships with her, not to say that our grants won't go through the same rigorous process as everyone else's, they will, but to have that relationship means a lot, particularly if the grant is funded. To already have a relationship with her is key. It's also, you know, a CV builder. To have that on your CV that you were a reviewer is an important academic service that you do to the institution, and so that's important. The only con that I could think of personally was, if you would call it a con, is the time commitment. So it really does take some time to read these proposals and give them their fair due. So there is a commitment in terms of setting aside the time to attend the panels, but there's also a commitment in terms of the pre-work and reviewing the grant proposals. And so if you decide that you want to do this, just recognize that you're looking at overall, and this is from the NSF website, about 30 hours of commitment as you are looking, they say 30 to 60 actually, depending on how long it takes you to review the proposals, write up the information, attend the panels, and then go and re-look at your reviews. So a little bit of a time commitment, but to me, definitely worth it for the professional development experience that you will receive. For those of you that have served, can you think of any other pros or cons that you thought of? Dr. Block or Dr. Kozart?
No, you did an excellent job.
Oh, thank you.
You really did. I guess the only con that I would put in there, you know, sometimes if you let it get to you, it could be discouraging when you hear some of the comments from the other reviewers. So that's it. Yeah.
Yeah. So just you have to have that mental resilience.
Right.
One person, I actually fought with her for 2 days over this proposal, and they kept bringing it up, and I kept explaining to them why it was not that situation. And ultimately, I think it left at the highest position, and I was really just happy because I had fought so hard for that particular one, only because I could tell that they had the idea of what they thought the highest kind of proposal should have been, and that was not, it wasn't fair based on the solicitation itself. You know, they had a very specific idea about how intellectual merit was achieved in the process, and this particular one was doing it among a group of classes versus creating one specific thing, and it was very difficult for them to wrap their minds around that. So again, yes, you're absolutely right, Dr. Block. It can end up being disheartening when you hear those comments. My last slide is just tips for submitting grants based on this review experience that I had. One of them is follow the instructions in the grant. If the grant says you need a participation agreement, or you need something about all of the PIs, just include that, because they are looking for that to disqualify specifically from anybody. But I know that they're looking at those I think, particularly harder in HBCU applications and MSI applications. So please follow the directions. Also, please make a case for diversity. So the broadening participation goal, make a case for diversity, even when you know that everybody should know that your institution does this work. It needs to be in the grant proposal so it doesn't become a part of the conversation about whether this institution is actually broadening participation or not. The next one is help reviewers understand the context of HBCUs related to research and publications. So when you're talking about your institution, make sure to share your teaching, the average teaching load and the number of students and the kinds of publications that are coming out of your institution, so that you talk about it ahead of time, so it's not something that is supposed or not understood within the panel. And there are panel reviewers that actually go out and look at institutional websites. They look at people's CVs, they look at people's Facebooks and LinkedIns. So these panel reviewers are serious about trying to figure out more information if you are vague within the proposal itself. And then the last one that I have on here is be clear and concise in the writing. And that gets into what Karen was saying about really being careful and being, well, not careful, being purposeful and mindful about how you're sharing your story and how that story can be relatable and understood by everyone that's reading, not just people in your subject matter area.
This is Karen again, interrupting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Joining the conversation. Mm-hmm. That goes back to, you just made a point about how reviewers try to get to the heart of who this person is and why they're doing what they're doing. And they look on social media, they look on LinkedIn and everything that they can that is available via the internet to get a sense of who the person is. And that speaks to something that we are always talking about in the Office of the Division of Research and Innovation, and that is to be visible. You've got to be in those spaces where people are going to look for you so that you can be found and you can be seen, and the work that you're putting your heart into can be acknowledged and people can know about it. So that's all I wanted to do. I wanted to add about that.
And there were several reviewers on the NSF panel, less on the Department of Education panel, but more on this NSF panel that were really private investigators. They wanted to know a lot about either the subject matter of which you were writing about, if they felt like they didn't have a clear understanding of that, or information about the scholars themselves. And so what's also very important is those bio sketches that I know sometimes we just kind of fill out and we never go back and update, or we never tailor. It is important to tailor those, because there might be a reviewer on there that's really looking at those bio sketches. So all of those documents end up being very, very important in the review process.
If you need help with your bio sketch, Drs. Shonda Green and Kimberly Loach are always available to help you with that.
So I think I'm at the question and answer stage. If anyone has any questions and answers, and what I might do is I'm going to undo, oh, and there's my contact information.